Breaking news. Libraries are really good resources. You heard it here first. Welcome to my channel. My name is Chloe. I am a recovering book snob. I recently signed up to my library and in a flurry of excitement, I just kind of chose books to read, and today I want to talk about the books that I found and the books that I ended up reading without any real plan. Alongside some of the physical books I read, I also discovered audiobooks. Like, I've never listened to audiobooks before, and libraries, at least in London, have audiobooks that you can take out, so that's really cool. Let's have a little drink check. Juicy peach and barley squash. A very summery drink. I'm very British in the sense that I end up in a kind of spiral of denial whenever we get to March and it's not sunny. So that's why I'm drinking that. It's like a manifestation thing. First up, I read Ghosts, which is Dolly Alderton's debut novel. I haven't actually read any of her books. I also haven't read any since. So this is my first and last Dolly Alderton experience. I really enjoyed this book. I was watching an Carly video recently and she described this book and she said it was like a more socially aware version of Sex and the City, and I think that's fairly accurate. Nina Dean is a food writer living in London. She just bought her first flat, but her life, other than what you kind of see on the surface, is kind of falling apart. Very quickly it becomes one of those books about that feeling of like unraveling that you get in your 20s and 30s, and how, you know, your friendships aren't quite the same, or at least they're changing, and your family life is changing. There's like a bit of a theme of kind of mortality and illness and stuff like that. I guess it is a love story, but it's one of those kind of not the love story you thought it was going to be type love stories. I really enjoyed it. It wasn't like perfect for me. I rated it, I think, 3 stars. It's one of those books that is kind of comforting to read because it's like, yeah, stuff goes wrong for everyone and you're not alone. And I also overall just found it a really easy book to read. It's not super long. It has quite good like pacing. Next up we have Queenie, which is about a 25-year-old British Jamaican woman living in London. Very broadly quite similar to Ghosts because it's all about that kind of life going somewhat tits up. But I would say this book is a lot darker, and you've also got like a lot of themes around like race and mental health. Where with Ghosts, she's a white woman and like pretty much everyone around her is white, and so you just don't deal with that theme at all. Whereas Queenie, she's a black woman and everyone around her is white. The book opens and she's just broken up with her long-term boyfriend who is white, and the book is from Queenie's point of view, so it's got a really interesting, unreliable narrator kind of voice. I found it a really good way to explore this theme of race because it very clearly showed how Queenie was kind of in denial about a lot of things, or at least like it took her a lot to realise a lot of, I don't want to spoil it, like for her to realise a lot of things around her own experience and to kind of see them for what they are. One of these books where it's like quite easy to read, you devour it, and in a sense it's light, but emotionally it's actually quite heavy. Like, it's messy. You just know it's going to be messy from the outset, and it kind of is what it seems to be. I'm still clearly trying to get used to like talking about books without ruining them, but really enjoyable book. Very quick to read, not necessarily easy to read. Onto the first audiobook I read. So again, Rachel is set in Ireland. Rachel is in her 40s and she's working at a addicts rehabilitation centre called the Cloisters. She actually was an addict herself, and that's where the book starts. And then people from her past start cropping up, and as you can imagine, that stirs the pot. And the book is definitely, you're kind of describing the present, but there's a lot of reminiscing, there's a lot of like conversations in the present about the past, and through that you learn about her relationship with some of the people that emerge, and you also learn more specifics about her history. You also learn about the people that she is dealing with, mentoring at the Cloisters, and each of these characters are also actually described really nicely. And I actually learnt, because I don't know very much about addiction, and I feel like I learned quite a lot through this book. One thing I will say is, as I said, it was my first audiobook, and the thing about audiobooks, like, they sound like a good concept, but sometimes the narrator is incredibly off-putting. And I think it was in the case of this book, the person who wrote it, Marian also narrated it, and it really made me realize how just because you wrote the book doesn't necessarily mean you can like audio narrate it that well, which is weird because I would assume that the two go hand in hand. But when you think about it, reading an audiobook, you kind of want to be an actor. And it was weird because it's like, oh, you wrote the book, but you can't really get the intonations right. That was my opinion anyway, my humble opinion. Now onto a cracker, The Museum of Modern Love, which was not the book I thought it was going to be. At this point, I had just started a Couch to 10K running program. So I listened to this book on my runs a lot, and it was an emotional roller coaster. Like, it was really intense. It's basically about Carty-Williams, who is a celebrated film composer living in New York, and it's based around Marina Abramovich's performance art called The Artist is Present. This was a very famous art performance that actually happened in New York at the MoMA Museum of Modern Art Museum. It basically had Abramovich sitting in a chair, and then there was another chair opposite, and members of the public could go and sit in that chair and look at her. As the performance progressed over, how long did it end up being? She ended up sitting for 716 hours and 30 minutes over, I think, 70 something days. So it lasted incredibly long, I think longer than expected, and people who sat in the chair opposite her ended up having really intense experiences. Sorry, I lose feeling in my legs halfway through my videos, and we've just reached that interval. The book has various points of view, including Marina's. Sorry, I'm standing for the rest of my performance because I don't want to lose any more sensation in my feet. So you have this really intense art performance going on, and then in parallel you're being told the story of Archie. He is separated from his wife, and he has a very kind of distant relationship with his daughter, and you obviously learn more about those as the book goes on. He also meets kind of this other person at the installation who's very different to him. It's overall just about human connection, and Archie kind of learns about himself as the performance like unravels a bit, and as you get that climax, you get a bit of an Archie self-reflection climax. It's definitely not a book that I would usually pick up, but I thought it was pretty incredible in the end. I definitely think quite specifically as one to like run to. So I'll be like running up the hill, like looking at the sunset, and then there'd be this really intense passage about like Marina Abramovich staring at someone and seeing into their soul, you know? The fifth and final book of my initial library experience was called Other People's Marriages, and that was also an audiobook, but so different from The Museum of Modern Love. The Museum of Modern Love was an artsy, intense book, and Other People's Marriages, it was kind of intense, but it opened me up to this genre that is like married people books and marriage gossip, which I didn't realise I would enjoy. I didn't realise I'd get loads out of, but here we are. I actually ended up finding it incredibly moving. The book mostly follows Steph and her reflection. She's sort of been married to her husband and been building a family for 10 years, and that's been her focus, and she's having a bit of epiphany around what she wants in the rest of her life. So she has this best friend that she hasn't seen in ages, and she wants to see her again. You also have a lot of flashbacks, and it turns out there are lots of secrets, and there were actually a lot of twists and turns that really kept me on the edge of my seat, and I just like couldn't put it down. I don't know, it was like emotional. It's pretty poignant in the end. And as I said, although I felt like I wouldn't relate to it as a genre because it's this kind of marriage gossip genre, there was also a lot to be learned about long-term relationships, like not just romantic relationships. A lot of the book was about long-term friendships as well. And so those were the first 5 library books I read. and I really enjoyed them. I think all of them got a solid 3 stars, but that was just with random selection. That was just with me picking them out, you know? I think what I particularly enjoyed was the fact that I just like left my comfort zone and enjoyed books and maybe discovered more genres. Let me know if you've read any of the books here, especially like Museum of Modern Love and Other People's Marriages. I had never heard of them or seen them or like people talking about them on BookTube or anything. Like the other 2, I know they're popular books, but those last 2 I was like, oh, thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.